So what, in your viewpoint, has changed over the last 5-10 years that arises these conversations?
Over the last 100 years, the U.S. Enjoyed splendid isolation. No matter what happens in the rest of the world, the U.S. was separate. It was prosperous. It was self-contained, and so there was no reason to, worry about the rest of the world. And then, the decline of the British Empire, and I'm a result of that. Singapore, Malaysia, where I was born, we were all colonies of the British Empire. And when that went into decline, and after World War II, the U.S. took a front seat in providing security, in providing capital to the rest of the world. Where we are right now is, I like Fareed Zakaria's book, which says the rise of the rest. The rest have caught up. We have economic systems, we have social stability that matches and even exceeds the U.S. in some ways. Where the U.S. is still a frontier to the rest of the world is perhaps two areas. One is security, and the other is information. The U.S. is still the leading purveyor of the freedom of information to the rest of the world. So in some areas, when we look at the U.S., and I'm talking about the U.S. from the outside looking in, the rest of the world has the luxury of being able to pick and choose what it is about the U.S. that we like. Many things that we've become accustomed to globally, capital markets, venture capital, entertainment, technology, and all of that originates from the U.S. today. And we are able to pick and choose what about capital markets do we like. Where having a stock market that is transparent and accountable is good. So many countries try and emulate that to the extent that they can. And some countries are better at it than others. And the country that I come from, Singapore, we have a legal system that is founded on the Anglo-Saxon model and the division of executive, legislature and the judiciary, and it works for us, and it works less in other countries. Where we are right now is that we have a country that is labeled socialist or communist, which is anything but communist in nature, but it is providing an alternative business model, an alternative economic model that looks liberal in some sense, but is conservative in others. But when you label it, you actually miss the point of what China has become today. And a lot of what China has been able to achieve is because of its own history, in the way in which it invested in education and social stability in the years after the Cultural Revolution, which is one of the worst things that can happen to any country anywhere in the world. And after that, they made the decision to to participate in the global economy, and the U.S. helped China along. In fact, right here in Beijing, there is a part of Beijing where there are 3 hospitals, and all 3 of those hospitals were either mission hospitals, hospitals set up by foundations, American foundations, in the early 20th century. So the U.S. was very much a part of the rise of China. So the world is trying to figure out what is it that we're dealing with. For me, when I look at the U.S., firstly, the rest of the world has the luxury, as I said, to be able to pick and choose what we like about the U.S. and then internalize that. But secondly, the sources of wealth creation, there are different models now that are running in parallel in different systems. The worst thing that we can do is to label something as capitalist or socialist because there's an engine that is driving societies to greater prosperity, which shouldn't be labeled that way. And so that's what I think we're dealing with. And I guess because of the rise of China, many developing countries now have an alternative hero to look at. There are as many countries that admire China as there are those which admire the U.S. And yet, all of us still subscribe to many things that originate in the U.S. Just as when we are talking about the decline of the US is leading the rest of the world in areas like AI. And when you see how AI has evolved just in the last 5 years alone, it could not have arisen in any other economy, not even in China. And the reason is because the competition, the kind of mental dexterity, the capital and the institutional framework that's required. Only the US has the scale to create that kind of infrastructure that becomes a frontier in technology. So the thing is that where are we right now? Is the US in decline? Are there alternative models that will eventually take over? Some people in geopolitics talk about the Thucydides trap. And the funny thing about giving it a label like that is that we frame geopolitics in the Western mindset, which is essentially agnostic, essentially warfaring. It's competitive, and I don't think that that's actually the driver that is shaping the world today. Although that's the label that we give it, in some ways. The issues that the U.S. is facing today. I mean, I go to San Francisco and New York. It smells of cannabis. There are people on the streets. Homelessness is a big issue. And when we look at that, we think that the U.S. is in decline, that the U.S. doesn't care for its own people, and so on. But actually, that's really the extreme of capitalism. And that's a price that the U.S. or American society is willing to put up with. Even if you're not willing to put up with, you've been putting up with it in a way that other countries will not want to put up with it because it reflects very poorly on them or something like that. But the truth is that all of us are heading in the same direction. All of us are going to be facing greater transparency of information that governments will not be able to deal with, that will create siloed thinking in society, that will fragment society into different camps and different ways of thinking. And I think that in some ways, all that we're doing is looking at our own future when we see what we think the U.S. is today. So that in a nutshell is how I will lay out the ground and I think what the ground looks like to me.